feel like I might need this in a few minutes. I want to take you back to Acts 26 for a second. I want to give you some context, and I want to tell you a little bit more about the story, and then I'm going to apply the story to our lives. And so let's back up for a minute. Let me tell you what's happening in Acts 26. Acts 26 is near the end of the sequel to Luke's gospel. So Luke told the gospel about Jesus, and then Acts is the book about how Jesus' word goes on through people and the church is formed. And so we're near the end of the book of Acts when we get into this scene where Paul the apostle has been persecuted by his own Jewish people for proclaiming that the Messiah has come. And so they've put him in prison. They've asked for the Romans to kill him. Sounds familiar, right? And since Paul is actually a Roman citizen, he has appealed to Rome and to Caesar to have a fair trial, which they incidentally sometimes did back in those days. And so when Addison started reading about what Paul says and Paul's story, it's actually the last time Paul gives his testimony in the book of Acts. And what he's doing is he has been brought before Festus in Caesarea. Caesarea was a port city. It was actually the Roman capital of Judea. It was Jerusalem, just like present-day Israel. Present-day Israel, Jerusalem is the religious capital of Israel. And if you know the actual capital of Israel, you'll know that it is Tel Aviv, right? Well, back in those days, Tel Aviv didn't exist. Actually, Caesarea was the capital. And so they took Paul and they imprisoned him in Caesarea, where he is awaiting transfer to Rome to go stand trial in front of Caesar. And so this is how the story unfolds. Well, first, these Romans, they didn't like messing around with people like Paul, so they wanted him to go on trial before the governor of Judea, who wasn't Pontius Pilate at this time. It was a fellow by the name of Festus. And Festus examines Paul, like Governor Pontius Pilate did Jesus, and Festus says, I really don't see anything going on here. I don't know why you Jewish leaders want to kill him. Sound familiar? It should. Luke's echoing a story that happened at the end of his gospel, and now this is at the end of Acts. And so what happens is Festus has got Paul in jail, and he hears that King Agrippa, the king of the Jews, he's actually coming to town. And so Festus says, I got one of your people here. I don't want to kill him. Your people want me to kill him. What do you think I should do with him? He's a Roman citizen. I got to give him a fair trial. And so Agrippa says, well, let me see him for myself. And so Agrippa is there, and the queen is with Agrippa, and they bring Paul out. Acts is written very carefully. Luke says there was a lot of pomp and circumstance there. And you can imagine when the king walks in, and Paul's sitting in a chair, and the king walks in, they're playing the music you're going to hear at graduation here pretty soon. Here comes the king. He's trotted out. And Luke is very careful about his details. He says not only was the king there, there were other people there. There were soldiers there. Sound familiar? It's an echo. The soldiers were there witnessing it, and there were other people there too. Luke wants to hone in on the other people, and I'll get back to that. And so Paul gives his testimony. He says how Jesus showed up to him on a road and struck him down, and the light was blinding. It did something to his eyes, and at that point, he knew that the Messiah had come. In fact, Jesus says to him, Paul, why are you kicking against the goads? And I'll tell you what that means in a minute. Why are you persecuting me? Now, Paul wasn't persecuting Jesus exactly. He was persecuting Jesus' people. And this is an important note. What Luke wants to know is when you feel the weight of the world on your shoulders, when you feel that you are being hemmed in on all sides, Jesus is the one feeling it with you. He is very in tune with what you're going through. Paul wants to point that out. And Luke also echoes it so that the people will hear. Jesus is so in tune with our suffering that it's not just Jesus' people that are being persecuted by Paul, it's Jesus himself. Did you catch that? Because it's powerful for us today. And so Paul goes through that, and then Festus stops him mid-sentence. If you look in your Bible, at In verse 24, it says, at this point, Festus interrupts Paul, and he says, you are out of your mind, Paul. Your great learning is driving you insane. And then I'm going to skip a few verses and go to verse 28 because Agrippa speaks up at this point. Agrippa said to Paul, do you think that in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian? And I love this part here. Catch this. Paul replies, short time or long time, I pray to God that not only you, but all who are listening may become what I am, except for these chains. That's my prayer today to the church that I have been appointed to the world that I am speaking to, is that whether it's a short time or a long time, you will come to believe what Paul believed and what I proclaim, that Jesus is raised, that your story isn't over, that the finish line is actually in front of you. He is the Alpha and the Omega. He is the beginning, and He is also the end. And so your story is still unfolding right in front of you. The finish line is right out in front of you. I want to point you back to last night. How many of y'all saw the Kentucky Derby? This is Kentucky, after all. Did you see the Kentucky Derby? Now, I know some of you are lying. You're not even raising your hands. You're embarrassed. I'm not a gambler in church. I might walk across the street and raise my hand, preacher, but Kurt, I'm not doing that in church. If you watched the Kentucky Derby, you saw something remarkable. You saw a horse, a long-shot horse, Golden Tempo, go from worst to first. You saw him at the back of the pack at the top of the stretch to the top of the stack when they crossed the line. How did he do it? Well, he had a remarkable trainer who happened to be the first woman trainer to ever win the Kentucky Derby. Now listen up. We are a place where women have leadership. I know all you women won some money yesterday. Tell me that you bet on Cherie DeVos' horse. Tell me that you're tithing 10%. All of our financial woes are over. You didn't? What happened to girl power? I digress. How did he do it? He had an awesome trainer. How do we get to the finish line? We have got an awesome trainer. We have got one that watches over us. How did Golden Tempo do it? I'm going to give you one word. Presley, you and Art, I don't see Presley back there. Art, you'll get this. Blinkers. How did Golden Tempo do it? Blinkers. You know what blinkers are? Blinkers are gear that horses wear over their face. Blinkers keep their eyes looking forward. Blinkers don't allow horses to look back, and they don't allow them to look to the side. They are looking straight forward. Blinkers allow horses to have focus, not be distracted. Keep your eye on the finish line is what blinkers do. I want you to think about Golden Tempo as he hit the stretch, and he had all of that stuff behind him that was just empty. He was at the back of the pack. He couldn't even see it. He might as well thought he was in second place at that point, except he's looking ahead, and he's looking at the horses that are in front of him, and they are just getting ready to get smoked. And how's he do it? Because he goes to the outside, and he's seeing nothing but the finish line. And if you watched it, he was out there. He came out of the clouds. He was out there by the grandstands. And you know what he didn't hear? He didn't hear the people, or he might have heard it, but you know what he didn't see? He didn't see the people waving their tickets, cheering his name. Yeah, Golden Tempo, go on, Golden Tempo. Because when you hear people cheering your name, you think you've already reached the finish line. The blinkers kept him focused. He wasn't at the finish line, no matter about his supporters and the people that were cheering him on. You know what else he didn't hear? Well, he might have heard them, but he didn't see them. He didn't see the people going like this to him. The detractors, the people that wanted him to fail, the people that didn't want the long shot to come home. He didn't see them doing that. He could only see the goal and the finish line. You see, blinkers are very useful for horses. They force them to keep looking ahead. It's not a gimmick. It's not something that you just try haphazardly. It's something done by a very smart trainer that will take a horse from ordinary to extraordinary. And if you don't believe that that's true, look at the greatest horse that ever put hoof to dirt. Do you know who he is? Oh, he is the best. Did you see his blinkers? Those Kentucky blue and white checked blinkers that he wore on his face? It kept Secretariat looking at the finish line. I want you to hold on to that idea of keeping your eyes on the finish line, the idea of worst to first. It's the same story that Luke is telling about Paul at the end of Acts, this dramatic encounter, this dramatic change, this dramatic focus that happens to Paul. I want you to notice, if you've read the book of Acts, that this is the third time that Luke tells Paul's conversion story. The third time. Do you know it's rare that a story in the entire Bible gets retold once? It's even rarer that a story gets retold in the same book 3 times. Now, what's that mean? It means for Luke, this is the most important story. Luke doesn't give his own encounter, his own testimony about Paul, because for Luke, Paul was the guy. Paul was his spiritual mentor. Paul was the one that pointed him toward Jesus. Paul was the one that stood in his road and said, this is what happened to me, and this is how powerful it is, and Luke believed it as gospel. Now, I want you to understand this because I don't take it lightly. When I've been preaching this series about encountering Jesus, I realize there are people out there that haven't had an encounter of their own like Paul. And that's fine. I want you to understand that's fine. Because not all of us get struck down in the middle of the road. Not all of us have the light shining from heaven blinding us. Some of us are like Luke and have a Paul around us. And that's important. Your encounter may be an encounter with your spiritual mentor that pointed you to Jesus. Just because you haven't had this encounter individually yourself doesn't make you less than. Luke wants to drive home the point that Paul pointed him to Jesus. And in fact, if you're paying attention, it's not just Paul who's on trial here. It's not just Paul's story that's on trial. It's Luke's testimony about what Paul had said being true. And Luke wants everyone to know that it is, in fact, the gospel. And it all started on a road to somewhere, not a road to nowhere. And here's what I want you to know, first and foremost. This is the first thing. Jesus meets us on our road. We're on our way somewhere. We're not going nowhere. There is a goal. There is a finish line. Some will call it heaven. Some will call it salvation. Some will call it sanctification. But it all comes from God who created us in the beginning and will see us through until the end. Do you understand that? The same God that created us to be who we are in God's image has a plan for us that we may dwell with Him forever and ever. And that doesn't just start in the pie in the sky by and by. It starts day to day. The indwelling of the Holy Spirit. God has a plan for you, and He will meet you on the road. The road was an ordinary place. He met Paul along his way. He was going somewhere. That's the way Jesus works. Your encounters with Jesus don't have to be a moment like Paul's where you're struck down. It can be a moment where you're sitting in traffic. It can be a moment where you've caught all green lights headed to the way you're going, and you started thinking, was that God? Did God know I was running late? It can be a parking spot, sister, that has opened up where there wasn't any parking spot. We complicate things so much with God, and sometimes God is just nudging us. I want to come back to that in a minute, so hold it with me. Jesus meets us on the road. I want to point out Paul's not in a temple when Jesus meets him. Paul's not in a synagogue. He's not in a prayer meeting. He's on his way somewhere that's not exactly where God would have had him going. Did you catch that? He's on his way, according to Luke and according to Paul's own testimony, he's on his way to continue trying to destroy the ministry of Jesus. That's what he's doing. And this is exactly where he meets Jesus. Paul is heading in the wrong direction when Jesus shows up. Now that'll preach in and of itself. Paul is heading the wrong direction. And he's heading at full speed. And what Jesus says when he shows up is, Saul, why do you kick against the goads? Now let me stop right there. How many of you know what a goad is? Very few, a couple. How many of you have heard the expression goading along or goading someone? Have you ever heard that expression? Yeah, it's kind of an old one. Goading them into it. The goad was the opposite end of a shepherd's staff. Now, I say the opposite end because when you think of a shepherd's staff, what do you think of? You think of the hook, right? And the hook end of the shepherd's staff was for pulling back an animal from where it was going, keeping the animal safe. But the goad end was sharp and pointed, and the goad would be used to press an animal in the right direction, to keep them on their way. Now, catch this. Paul is a learned man. In fact, Festus says, you are so learned, it's screwing you up. And Jesus says to Paul, why do you kick against the goads? Well, what are the goads? The goads are the Word of God that Paul has believed in his whole life. He grew up a believer in God. He wasn't unaware of what God had planned. He knew the prophets. He eventually asked Agrippa himself, who is a Judean, don't you know the prophets? The goad that God is using is the Word of God that came to Paul, the people of God who were around Paul, and all along God was goading him toward his way, toward his logical conclusion. I want you to think about that. You're waiting for a moment for the sky to open up and God speak to you. How many times have you been goaded by God and you kick back against them? Now that is a rich expression. God is trying to point me in the right direction and I'm just going. Do you know why Golden Tempo had the blinkers? It wasn't because he was the most easygoing horse. Cherie DeVoe said it was the most hard-headed animal. Jose Ortiz said it was the laziest animal. They were trying to goad him to greatness. And God the whole time was trying to goad Paul to greatness. God knew Paul's potential. And God knows your potential. God is goading you somewhere. Why do you continue to kick against the goad? And here's the truth about Jesus still being risen today. Jesus doesn't wait for you to arrive somewhere in order to show up for you. He meets people while they're in motion, sometimes going the wrong direction. The risen Jesus will show up when we least expect it. I'm sure Paul didn't expect what happened to him that day. And he gets right in front of them on their road. And sometimes it comes from another person. Remember Luke. Paul was his person. So here's what I want to tell you too. The road that you're on is not the right road necessarily. And if that needs to be said to you, you need to hear it. And you're kicking against the goads when you're not heading that direction. But if this does apply to you and you're not on the road that you're supposed to be on, you are not too far down that road for God to show up for you. The risen Jesus often shows up when we're heading the wrong direction. Some of us have been running hard in the wrong direction for years. And that's just the gospel truth. But what happens to Paul is hope for us. That Damascus road tells us that we're never too far gone for God to show up to us. The risen Jesus actually has a long history of showing up to people such as these. And so what happens? Golden tempo. Worst to first. Right? The last will be first and the first will be last, and all those confusing things Jesus says unfolds right here in the story of Paul. Did you catch who Paul was? I want you to appreciate what is happening in this story. I want you to appreciate who Paul was. Now, I've said at times about David. Now, David was kind of an interesting character. He had many layers. But not all those layers were good. In fact, you had to kind of dig deep at David's layers to find the good. And I got a little statue of David on my desk, and I often look at it and when I'm having a real bad day or I've done something ungodly, I'll look at it and say, well, if God can love him, God can surely love me, and if God can forgive him, and you know what Paul did? Paul looked at David and said, hold my adult beverage. Paul took David to another level. Paul was the last person that you would ever think that Jesus would come to and say, I've got a mission for you. Paul was the worst. Paul stood there as they were stoning the first martyr and held their coats. Paul wanted to see the church die before it even got a foothold. Paul was completely against Jesus, and yet this is the man God had purposed to write most of our New Testament. That's right. Paul wrote more in the New Testament than any other author. This is the guy that God said, I'm going to send you across 10,000 miles of the world to spread this gospel. You. This is the guy that he would send to stand before kings and Caesar himself. This guy, this worst, is the one Jesus has purposed to be first. And Paul stands before Agrippa and before Festus and before all of those dignitaries, and he says, I was reined in by Jesus Christ. I was reined in. What's that mean? The blinkers are on. The blinkers are up. I've got the blinkers on, Jesus. I'm not looking back. I'm not looking back to where I came from. I'm only looking ahead to the finish line. That's what he's saying there. And if God can take Paul, worst to first, what can God do for you who's somewhere in the middle? You're not Paul. You didn't try to kill people and imprison people to put out the fire of Jesus. If God has purpose for Paul, how much more purpose does he have for you? You're going somewhere. I hope you catch that. Paul does not hide his Damascus Road story. He told it to Luke. In fact, Paul leads with it. He doesn't say, after he's questioned by Agrippa and Festus, well, you know, I've done all this and I've written all these books, and this is, he says, I was a heinous person. I was unworthy of the one showing up for me. I had it all before my eyes in the Old Testament. He says to Agrippa, you know the prophets. I had that before my eyes, and I denied him and tried to destroy him, and I persecuted him. And yet he showed up for me. Your worst chapter is not a disqualification from the story God is writing for you, through you. In fact, your worst chapter is probably the most important chapter you have. Because the most unlikely witness becomes the clearest harbinger of grace. The worse the before, the louder the after. Whew, that'll preach. And who does Luke write this for? All people. All people. He doesn't write it for the king or Festus, the dignitaries. I'll show you that. Let's pull out our Bibles one more time. We are church-going people, right? I want to show you this. After Paul had done all this, and after he says, whether it's a short time or a long time, I don't care, except that everyone might become what I am except for the chains. I like that part. And as they're leaving, Agrippa says to Festus, you know, this man could have been set free if he hadn't appealed to Caesar. Agrippa still doesn't get it. He's going back to a political system that he's saying, well, Paul screwed up. He's going back to the law that he knows instead of the grace that he's shown. And who's left for it? Who's left for that story? Well, I'm going to use my sanctified imagination because this is what I do in my quiet time. You might be like Festus and thinking I'm crazy. But I'm just crazy enough to think that we may run into somebody up in heaven while we're having our sanctified coffee in the morning, and we're hearing that song like the choir sang. That's going to be in heaven. I got a glimpse of it today. That was powerful. And we're hearing people sing. We're hearing people sing. We're hearing people sing, Alex. We're hearing people sing, Rose. And we look across the way and we see somebody there in that heavenly place. We say, what's your name? And they tell us their name. Well, how'd you come to Jesus? Well, I was in this room. And I was just kind of there. I was supposed to clean up afterwards. And there was a governor there, and there was a king there, and there were all these soldiers there. And this man stood up and started talking about how Jesus had done something with his life when he was completely lost, when he was at rock bottom. And I thought to myself, you know, if Jesus could do that for him and I'm not at rock bottom, I might be close. Maybe he can do that for me. And it was the one in the room all along. It's the one in the room all along. Luke didn't just write this for people 2,000 years ago. He wrote it for you and me. He wrote it to set you free. He wrote it so that Jesus could draw alongside of you on your road. He says, I pray that not only you, but all who are listening, all who hear this word, might have what I have. It's for you today. And so here's where I'm going to end it with you. Blinkers up. Put your blinkers up. What is standing in your way from seeing the finish line? Blinkers up. What are you listening to that is drawing you away from Jesus instead of near Jesus? Blinkers up. Are you hearing the detractors and it's causing you to stumble? Are you hearing your supporters and getting proud of yourself and thinking you're not finished yet? Blinkers up. The writer of Hebrews knew this. Hebrews says this, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with the perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. That's blinkers. Blinkers up. You're running a race. Blinkers do two things, not only for horses, but for people. They let you tune out all the things you don't need to be focused on. All the distractions, all the deception, all of the things that would cause you to stumble and cause you to fall and cause you not to make it. The blinkers protect those. And the second thing it does is just as important. It keeps you focused on the finish line. And there is a finish line. You have a finish line. And you're running toward it, even if you're at a slow trot. Even if you're at the back of the pack and there seems no way and you've hit the stretch and you don't think you can make it, blinkers up. Because you're on your way somewhere. The gospel is this. Jesus left his place to meet us in our place so he could take our place that we might be with him in his place forever and ever. If there is anything holding you back from hearing that word, if there is anything hindering you in your run of faith, blinkers up. Focus on the finish line. Jesus is ahead of you. He's not behind you. What happened 2,000 years ago didn't stop him. It only propelled him. Jesus is in front of you. The finish line is ahead. Blinkers up. If you haven't made Jesus the Lord of your life, I hope you will run. I hope you will consider these aisles the stretch. And I hope you will lean toward that finish line with everything you got. And I guarantee you when you get here, you will find Jesus Christ himself.